Hey, thanks for joining in and checking out West Church Lake Norman online and in person at the high school. This morning, you guys are both getting the same message that because I'm on the other side of the world. I am in Kampala and in Entebbe right now, probably 2 to 3 in the afternoon, and we are diving in, getting really prepared for the conference that we're going to lead tomorrow and Tuesday called Mind, Body, Spirit. Lindsay, Caroline, Dawn, and I are here together, or actually they're in Uganda together, and Dawn's going to be leading yoga and spirituality. Caroline's going to be teaching nutrition and best practices for muscle development and body care. Lindsay is going to be working with the children and the youth and assisting me as I do the spiritual content of the 4 agreements, how we can best have great practices in our lives. Then we're going to be meeting with Dero Karen, who is going to be the campus pastor of the West Campus there in Kagumba. We're going to be meeting some of the moms and the little children that Dero has been in ministry with. I've shared with you before that the church in Uganda, they scorn parents that have children out of wedlock, and it's a very conservative religious tradition there. And so Dero has a heart for reaching out to others that have been shunned by the church, which is exactly what our heart is. So we're so excited to be able to begin this ministry together. I pre-recorded this message for you because I'm so passionate about this series. We are doing Freeing Jesus, Be a Ninja. And we've been talking about this and preparing for this for a really long time. And so selfishly, I wanted to share with you this morning because I just think as a church and as a people, we have an opportunity to free Jesus. He has been held hostage by religion for too long. And, you know, if we could just introduce people to Jesus and get away from all the trappings and the confinements of religion, I think folks that say that they're done with church or done with religion but are willing to be spiritual, I think they could fall in love with Jesus in such a new and deep and meaningful way. So selfishly, I wanted to share with you today about the topic of Jesus as teacher. Last week, we talked about Jesus as friend, and so today we're going to talk about Jesus as a teacher. I want, for just a few minutes, you to think about who is one of your favorite teachers, and then who is one of your least favorite teachers. So now worship with the worship team, and we'll be back in just a minute.
He has. For thousands of years, humankind has added layer upon layer of man-conceived ideas and understanding upon the person Jesus of Nazareth. What began as a movement of love became an institution caged with doctrine, rigidity, and exclusivity. Through the series, we will explore new understandings.
When I was growing up, I really felt called to be in ministry. I wanted to be a children and youth pastor and a minister of music. In the Baptist church that I grew up in, women could work with children and youth. They couldn't work with adults. And they could also be over the music program. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. I really feel like God is calling me to do that. I told my parents that, and they're like, absolutely not. You do not need to go into work in the church. You'll never make any money. You'll never find a job. And so, no, we're not going to send you to college and pay for your college education for you to go be in ministry. I'm like, okay, fine. So the next best thing to me was to be a teacher. I wanted to be with children and youth, and I wanted to be in relationship and help them find ways to achieve wisdom and knowledge. And so I went to Appalachian and majored in elementary education and got a minor in psychology. And I started teaching school. Now, back then, I mean, this was 30 years ago. Back then, school was very different, and tests were very different than they are now. So I want to show you a math problem up on the screen. Back when I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, this whole thing, critical thinking and open word problem analysis, that stuff didn't exist. Like we'd have this test called the California Achievement Test, and it was like very simple, very well, not simple, but very straightforward. And the problems were just laid out like this problem that you see on the screen. You see that problem, you can come up with an answer really fast, right? All right, now I want you to take a look at this next problem. If Jane has 23 cats and I have 2, and Jane gives me 5 cats, how many more cats does Jane have than I? Now, I'm not going to answer that for you right now because it would require me to actually think through it, and I didn't do that before I picked out this word problem. But there's lots of different steps. Like, my first inclination was to add 5 and 2, and that's 7, and subtract that from 23, and that's 16. But that's not actually right because Jane gives 2 away, so she only has 21. So 21 minus 7 is 14. So I'm pretty sure Jane has 14 cats. But that's a lot. I'll never forget standing in front of my 6th grade class, and we would have these sample tests that we would get from the State Department in Raleigh of the end of course tests that we'd have to give out. And 6th grade was what I taught, and that was like a pass-fail year. If the kids didn't pass the math and the science and the reading section of those tests, they would not pass that grade level. So it's really, really big deal. And this was the first time the state had ever done this. And so they were sending us sample questions to practice with our students. And long gone were the A plus B equals C, what is C if the answer's D, and all that kind of stuff. Those problems were long gone. It was stuff like Jane and her cats, or the one that I still probably can't answer. If train A leaves the station, did you ever have that one and it's going, like 23 miles an hour, and train B leaves the station going in opposite direction at the same time, but it's going at 33 miles an hour, blah, blah, blah. At some point, when do they intersect? I mean, those problems for me were impossible. And so I'll never forget having the new sample with my students there and being like, okay, we need to find the answer to number 5. And I'm like, I have no idea how to figure this out. And I mean, this is 6th grade math. This is not rocket science. And so I just could not find the process. And I couldn't figure out how the state got the answer that they got. And I had a little more pride and ego then. So I'm like, I wasn't going to tell my students, I don't know how to solve this. So I'm like, Philip, Carmen, do either of you know how to come up with the answer? Would you like to come show us, on the board? And so he or she would get up and come up and show the rest of the class how to figure out the problem. Teachers have an important role in our lives. When I taught school, I loved my kids. I didn't love the test scores and the grading, and ultimately, I really did have this calling on my heart and my life to become a pastor and a minister. But teaching, it's pivotal. And learning, it happens in all aspects of our lives. We learn in so many different ways from so many different things. Jesus was the ultimate teacher. And so for just a few minutes, I would invite us to think about, what does it mean to have Jesus as a teacher? Religion has for so long taught about learning about Jesus. Now that may seem complicated, so let me say it one more time. But for so long, religion has taught about the need to learn about Jesus. Like, it's almost as if we are passive onlookers. Like, we need to learn that we need to learn about this man. What could our faith and what could our lives look like if we learned about the actual man? If we look at the real person of Jesus and not all the confinements that have been placed around him by religion and by the westernized Orthodox church. So this morning I want us to think about what Jesus was like as a teacher. The first thing that I want to point out is that often Jesus was referred to as a rabbi, or when we see the women go to the tomb after the crucifixion at the dawn of the new day, they call him Rabboni. Now, we think the term rabbi in today's culture and context, we think that means like a clergy person, a pastor, a priest. And that is the meaning that we associate with the word rabbi, but that's really not what that meant at all. A rabbi was a teacher, someone whose words bore spiritual authority. They would have been known as like the sage or the storyteller. In a group of people, they would have been known as a wise elder. So Jesus is referred to directly about 90 different times in the New Testament. The New Testament is like the second half of the Bible. It starts with Matthew and it ends with Revelation. Jesus is referred to directly, like if somebody were addressing me directly, like, hey, Andrea, Jesus was referred to 90 different times in the New Testament. Now, it's so important to note that of those 90 times, 60 times Jesus was referred to with the term rabbi, master, or teacher. And those three terms all meant the same thing. Like he was the master of knowledge. He taught in everything that he did and everywhere that he went. It wasn't like, now where you come, or actually, you know what? I'm going to press pause on that thought for just a minute. It isn't like it is now. And that's like the crux of our problem. I want you to flash back 3 years pre-pandemic. And the idea of church and being taught in church was that you would come and you'd sit in all the chairs and you'd listen and then you'd go on your merry way. And then the pandemic happened and that changed everything about how we were taught as a church. Now, the good news is, which I'm so grateful for you and for the amazing staff of West and the leaders, we have always tried to meet people where they are. And so long before the pandemic happened, when West first started, we knew the power of technology and we knew that you were busy. And on Sunday mornings, you have ball games and gymnastic competitions and all different kinds of things that are pulling at your time. Or frankly, the other 6 days of the week have been so jam-packed that when you finally have one morning that you can wake up and just hang out at your house for a little while, you wanted to do that. Or you might still want to do that. And so we have embraced that, like, learning at church needs to not just be at a magic hour on Sunday morning. It's why we started things like Crafted Conversations that meets on Sunday evening. It's why we have a yoga, fresh expression that meets on Thursday evenings. It's why we have a golf group, a golf fresh expression that meets on Tuesday nights. All of those are worship experiences where you can come and you can do things that you would normally enjoy doing, but you also can take some steps deeper in your journey of faith in a non-threatening but transformational way. Now, that's how we view teaching and learning. And guess what? That's exactly how Jesus viewed it too. He did not just go and teach in the temple on the Sabbath. Like, he taught on the lake. He taught by the campfire. He taught while they were walking down a mountain. He taught anywhere and everywhere. He taught at people's dinner tables. He taught on the side of the street. And he would teach anyone that was willing to listen. He didn't reserve his lessons for the special few or the higher elect. One of the things I always struggled with when I taught, especially 6th grade, the first couple of years that I taught, was we grouped our children, our students, based on their academic levels. Now, it was my first year of teaching, and I didn't have a voice in that decision. I inherited a system that was in place before I came, and I think that they thought they were doing me a favor by giving me the class of academically gifted students to be my homeroom, which meant that I would teach them more than just my specialty subject area, which for that year was math. And don't laugh, because I don't know how, well, I was taking a job. That's how I ended up teaching math. But I also got to teach this one group of students like language arts and reading and then math. So I had this one group a little bit longer every day. But then they would change classes, much like we understand in middle school and high school. And then I would get another set of students, and they would be grouped based on their academic level. And then I get another set of students. So my first year of teaching, I had 4 different sets of students. I had the high achievers, the smart kids. Then I had 2 classes of average kids. And then I had 1 class of below average kids. I wondered what that did to the self-esteem of the kids, but like I shared with you, I mean, first of all, I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and nobody really wanted to know exactly how I thought they should restructure their entire system. But for 1 second, we needed to not kid ourselves that the students didn't know that they were grouped by their ability and by their intelligence. And that 4th class that was grouped as a below average class, they knew, and they would call themselves the dumb ones. Oh, hey, Miss Fair. Back then I was a Fair. It's our turn. Now you've gotten stuck with the dumb ones. Isn't that a great way to end your day? As the year went on, they showed so much growth in all of their subject areas. And hopefully their self-esteem grew as well. But they knew that they were looked at differently. And they knew that the teachers saw them differently. The same thing applied to Jesus. But the cool thing about Jesus, and one of the things that I think we need to really embrace and free him from the confinements that we've placed on him, is that Jesus would have not chosen the academically gifted. Jesus would not have chosen the religious elite. In fact, as we see him teaching, we see him get frustrated with the religious elite, and we see him spend more and more time with the people who were scorned and oppressed by others. Jesus existed for what we refer to as the least of these, or the people that were lost. Now, when I say the word lost, don't get tripped up on a religious term like, they didn't know him as their Lord and Savior. That is not what I mean at all. When I say lost, I mean looking for purpose in their life, like looking for their self-worth, looking for their meaning. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt like you are wandering through a wilderness in your own personal journey, and like things used to be one way and now you find yourself in this wilderness? That's what it means to be lost. The lessons that Jesus taught were for all people, but he had a real heart and a real passion for the least, the ones nobody else wanted to have anything to do with, and those who had not yet found their self-worth and their need and worthiness of being loved. And he was determined to teach them about the heart of God. But the cool thing about Jesus is he didn't just say it. And that's why I think we as a church, as a religion, we need to get away from talking about Jesus. We need to get back to just talking about the things that Jesus talked about. Recognizing that, we are so human and we are so not God. And even though we recognize that God lives and abides and breathes in each of us, we are not quite that self-actualized yet. And so we don't quite understand all the things that he taught. But Jesus did say, I am the way, and I am truth, and I am life. And if you come through me, you'll get to the Father. And so he taught us how to have this amazing life and to find our way and to find peace and joy, contentment and hope. And he taught all people in all ways. Now, it's important too that we understand the context in which he was teaching, because he would have been, because he was Jewish, he would have been bound to the same 613 plus laws that existed in the Torah. Now, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, or what we refer to as the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. That was the Torah. And so Jesus would have had all the laws of the Torah in his mind and in his knowledge base. And so when he was teaching, he was trying to show the people, hey, like, look, don't get so bogged down in just the structure of the rules and the do's and the don'ts. Let go and let's imagine the laws in a new way. And that's what he did as a rabbi. He was a radical, revolutionary rabbi, a wise sage, a wise elder. And so he did 3 things. Instead of replacing the Hebrew law, he reimagined them, he expounded on them, and he innovated them. He gave new definition to like murder and adultery and infidelity. And he brought all the rules, the 613 rules, he brought them from just being, like some dogma and doctrine on a piece of paper to being laws on our hearts, and weighed them against the concept of love. And that's probably the most important thing that we could take away from today. When Jesus deals with the law and he is living out his Jewish tradition and his Jewish faith, but as their rabbi, as their teacher, trying to show them the very heart of God, he would take those old laws and he would weigh them against one foundational principle that applied to everything. And that principle was love. So he would take those laws and reimagine them, and he would expound upon them and find new ways of communicating them to the people. And he would measure them against love. Like one of the laws was about what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. And he's like, look, are you going to let someone hurt and struggle and suffer on the Sabbath? No, because that's not of God. God would never want someone to struggle and suffer. So why would we? We always need to act in love. He said, I come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. I come to write the law on your hearts. And the law was one of love. He did not come with this magic checklist. And so many times in religion, we think that there's this list and that like when we die and we go stand before God, have you ever heard that term? When you go stand before God, like there's going to be this book and everything's going to get checked off. That's not what Jesus taught at all. In fact, in the ways that Jesus taught, he embodied it. And that's really all that he did. That sounds really simple, but it's actually really huge because Jesus embodied the law of love in absolutely everything. The early church really got hung up on the idea of Jesus as a teacher. They did not like calling him that. They felt like that diminished his role and responsibility, and that it diminished his divinity. So they spent a lot of time arguing around the word teacher. But what if instead of thinking that that takes away from his authority and his power and his connection with God, what if we look at it as just this tremendous gift that we've been given? And by the ways that he taught and the ways that he lived, he really showed what the very nature of God was and is like. I mean, that's a pretty cool lesson, right? The other thing I want us to think about today, I want you to look at this screen. Parables. The meaning of the word parables. A parable is a story, and it's how Jesus taught. He didn't sit there and say, okay, now, lesson 1 is this and lesson 2 is this. He would tell them stories. And the stories were parables. And parables meant to come alongside, from the Greek word para, and then balian. That's the other half of the word parable. That means to throw, to turn upside down. So for Jesus, the parables were stories that would throw everything upside down. And he taught in a ton of parables. I'm going to share one with you in just a second, but I want us to think about for just one more minute the idea that when Jesus taught, he did not give them finite answers. We have wrestled with, we feel like we offer pretty decent programming and ministries, and we wonder, okay, what keeps us from just skyrocketing and having this just broad touch in the world? And we've wrestled with that for 11 years, and we finally discovered, based on feedback that we would get from folks that would come and worship with us, and they'd say, oh, we love your music, oh, we love the setting, we love that it's dark, it feels like other churches that we really like, but you just said some stuff about the whale or the lion's den, and I don't agree with that. It's black and white. There is no gray. We need to really remember that when Jesus taught, it was all gray. When he told a parable, well, let me stop that. It was all gray except for love. I mean, there was no gray in love. That was the absolute. But all the other ways and lessons that he taught, like the parables, they did not have clear answers. And if you read the parables in the Gospel of Matthew, you're going to get one interpretation, which usually is not an interpretation at all. But if you read the parable in the Gospel of Luke, Luke writes them, and he'll tell you what he's getting ready to tell you. Then he'll tell you the parable, and then he'll tell you one more time how he wants you to interpret the parable. Luke is very straightforward like that. He interprets the parables of Jesus for the people, but not Matthew. And Jesus didn't. And he even said, those who have eyes, some will see and some will not. Those who have ears, some will hear and some will not. And they really wrestled with, why did he not tell them just flat out the answer? And we never have that clear answer. Different theologians say different things. Some say it's because he wanted some people to be kept out of the kingdom. But that doesn't work either, because that's not the nature of God, is to be exclusive. So we have no idea really why Jesus didn't give clear, finite answers to the parables. But we do know that he didn't. The most important thing about that is to, when you look at them, know that when you read it one time, you may take something away, and then when you read it again later, you may take a total different lesson away. And we're always invited, when we read the stories, to find ourselves in the story. Jesus gave this discourse. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. And after the Sermon on the Mount, he lays out lots of different parables in that. But after that, it's important for us to see that he didn't go back to that little checklist of right and wrongs and do's and don'ts. He actually went and did the very work that he had talked about. So right after the Sermon on the Mount, he goes and he cleanses a leper. And he heals a centurion's servant. I wanted to share with you one parable as we close today, and then I want us to look at what Jesus did after that parable, and then I want us to think about how that could be relevant in our lives today. I want you to take a look at this image that's on the screen. So I want us to take a listen to this parable that Jesus taught. It is about wine and wineskins, and the image that you see on your screen is a wineskin that would have been used historically during the time of Jesus. People approached Jesus and said, "Why is it that we and the other religious people, the Pharisees, rigorously discipline our body and our spirit by fasting, but you and your ragtag band of followers, they don't?" So they're trying to get him to point out that he's not following all those laws that everybody talked about. And Jesus told them, "When you're celebrating a wedding, you don't skimp on the cake and the wine. You have a feast. Later, you may need to exercise moderation, but not now. No one throws cold water on a friendly bonfire. This is kingdom come." And then he went on to say, "No one cuts up a fine silk scarf to patch old work clothes. You want fabrics that match. And you don't put your wine in cracked bottles." Now, I'm not going to interpret that parable for us at all, because the point is, we need to wrestle with it. You don't put something new in something old. You don't put something new in something that is broken. That's what he's saying. What does that mean to you? As soon as he said those things to the people, I want you to take a look now at what he went and what he did. He raised a young girl back to life. He gave sight to a blind man, and he gave a mute man back his voice. Now, we're going to leave this up on the screen for a few minutes, and I want to invite you to think about, what if these things, these miracles, how could they be viewed in today's context? Like, how can we go and raise a young girl back to life? How can we give sight to a blind man? And how can we give someone that can't speak back their voice? You know, Jesus said, we don't talk about this a lot because it is very intimidating and nobody really understands what it means. And or if you're stuck in the religious confinement, you don't understand what it means. The new progressive theologians like Richard Rohr, they'll explain what it means, but it's a little bit of a bumpy ride for a very traditionalist thinker. But raising a young girl back to life and giving sight to a blind man and giving a mute man back his voice, Jesus said, all these things that I have done, you can do. You have the same power to go and do all the things that I've done. You have that same power in you. So how could you and I give a mute man back his voice? Well, maybe we can find the people in our society and in our culture that are marginalized, and their voice and their power has been taken away. And we do things with them to help them have their voice. Is that not giving someone that is mute back their voice? Absolutely. So guess what? We are being Jesus then. We are embodying the heart of God then. We are teaching then. Anytime that we speak up or out on behalf of someone that does not have the respect of someone else, we are being Jesus. If you're in school and there's somebody being bullied and nobody wants to sit with them or hang out with them, and you speak up and say, hey, stop being mean to them, that is being Jesus. Or what about giving sight to a blind man? There are so many ways that we can help others have sight when they are experiencing things in their lives things that are difficult and dark, and they can't find a way through. And by offering friendship or alliance or help, we help them see that they're not alone, that they're not going to be engulfed in a scary darkness, that the darkness that they are experiencing, because it also is grounded in this amazing love, that darkness can be beautiful and a place of peace. And lastly, raising a young girl to life. I mean, the story in Scripture, he really does like resurrect or resuscitate, actually, a young girl. And we may say, no, we can't do that. But I would encourage us to see that we could. Her name was Mrs. Barker. She was my third grade teacher. My mom died in between my second grade year and my third grade year. And my dad did the best that he could, but back in 1978, we lived in a very patriarchal household. My dad worked a lot, and my mom took care of me. And so when my mom died unexpectedly, my dad did the best he could, but I didn't really have a lot of women figures in my life. My aunt lived far away, and my grandmother was very old. And so my dad, tried to figure out how to best parent this little girl. And so he had this idea. He didn't know how to take me shopping. And back then you didn't have stores everywhere like you do now. And we lived in this tiny town. And so he worked in the textile industry as a security guard for their plants. And he found this particular fabric. It was called velour. And it's popular right now, of all things. But back then, my dad got velour. And he got a bolt of every single color. And he took me to some seamstress and had her make outfits for me. Pants and shirts, long sleeve, short sleeve, long pants, short pants, out of this velour material. Now, I tried to find a picture of that. I could not, but oh my gosh, I had to have just looked pitiful. My third grade teacher, Ms. Barker, she took me under her wing. I don't remember a lot of specific memories from that time period, but I do remember that like multiple times that year on the weekend, she'd take me home with her, and she and her husband would have dinner with me and play games with me. Some could say that that's crossing a boundary, but I really believe that Mrs. Barker gave a young girl new life. I needed someone to just sort of dote on me like my mom used to do. My dad didn't, that just wasn't his way of parenting. And that teacher loved me. She took someone that looked like Elise, and she took someone that was lost. And just by inviting me into her home and spending some time with me, she gave me life. Jesus is the ultimate teacher, and he gives us this amazing life, and we're called to go give it to others. I hope you will do that with me. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, thank you for giving us the ultimate example of a teacher who doesn't teach about stuff, but actually lives it. May we be that same teacher. May we look at how everything was weighed up against love, and may we go and do that in and through all things. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. I invite you to continue praying for us as we are in Uganda. If you're not getting the updates, you can let us know in the chat room, and we'll include you on the updates that we're sending out every day. But we're so excited to see how God is at work in Kagumba and the West folks. Some really cool things are yet to come. Go in peace.